Kixie Sunday Morning Magazine. Now, this morning I do have via the telephone a young lady by the name of Shayla Hicks. She is an author of a book that is about transitions. By the way, that's the name of the book, Transitions. It's a biblical journey of womanhood. We're interviewing her via the telephone this morning to find out about this wonderful publication called Transitions. And I want to say, good morning, Ms. Shayla Hicks.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for agreeing to do this interview. Now, we found out about your publication through one of our longtime radio announcers, and that's none other than Lady V. And she was giving your book, and she really enjoyed it and told me it would be great, Lessie, to have her on the Kixie magazine. I said, well, let me get to call her Miss Hicks.
That's great. I appreciate it. That's amazing.
Yeah, it is. Now, Miss Hicks, tell us a little bit about you. Are you a mom? Do you work, or what do you do?
Well, I'm a stay-at-home mom. I've been a stay-at-home mom since my first child in 2015. And so it's definitely a transition. It has been a transition, but I enjoy being at home with my babies. I have a 2-year-old, Chloe, and also I have a new baby, a 4-month-old, Chase.
All right. Okay, so it sounds like you have a girl and a boy.
I do, and then I also have 2 bonus babies. Well, they're not really babies because they're 21 and 19, Jasmine and Darius.
Oh, okay. What did you call them? What kind of babies did you call them?
I call them my bonus babies.
Bonus babies. Okay. I thought you were going to say, I have 2 schnauzers or something. You know how people call their dogs.
No.
Well,
no, not pets, but my children.
Well, in writing a book, it seems like you have your hands full being a stay-at-home mom and a young baby as well. But you also sound a little young. I'm not going to ask you your age, but you just sound like you are a little young. Am I correct on that?
I'm young at heart, and I don't mind sharing my age. God has blessed me with 38 years, and I thank Him for them. So if you consider that young, then I'll accept it.
Yeah, I consider that young. Yes, ma'am. Well, let's talk a little bit about authorship and writing and all. When did you discover that you were a writer?
Oh, wow. It's so funny you ask that question because I'm still convincing myself, even though I'm holding the book in my hand. But I have always loved to write. I journaled from a young girl. I would just, sit down and write down my thoughts. And the older I got, I always kept my journals, and it's always good to kind of go back and read them. So I would say that was the beginning of my writing career, but the manifestation came actually with this book. It's my first publication. So Transitions was birthed a long time ago, I like to say, but the words came on the page within the last 2 years.
Okay. Great. Well, and when you say they came on the page, I've always wanted to ask authors, it's so hard if you're not an author to get this concept. Ideas, do they just pop in your head? Do they float in your head? Can you describe how you got the inclination to put them down on paper?
Well, I would honestly say for me, it's God inspired. And I don't want to say that as a cliche, but it's the truth because especially with transitions, it was actually born out of a calling, I would say, because about 4 years ago now, my husband sat me down and told me that he felt the call to pastor. At that time, he had been a minister for several years, and he told me that he felt the call to pastor, and he didn't know when it would occur. And so at that point, because, we're partners in marriage and also in ministry, I just sat down and began to pray to God about what He would have me to do aside my husband. and he spoke to me about starting a women's ministry, and the name that he gave me was Transitions. So the book was actually birthed out of that calling, and as I sit down preparing for the women's ministry, God just began to give me so many things, and he took me back to, times when I sat down with friends and what I call unofficial counseling. Sitting down with friends and, asking, when you have people asking you different questions, what should I do about this? And I realized that, a lot of times people, when you give them scriptures, it doesn't always translate because they feel like the Bible is not relatable to what they're going through. And I wanted to really convey that message to women that the Bible can be a guideline, a self-help book almost for us, because every situation that we go through in our transitions through womanhood is already, occurred in the Bible. So many stories of triumph, trials, suffering, and overcoming are in the Bible for us to use as a guide. And so that's where Transitions, was born. I wanted to create a biblical parallel from some of the things I went through in my life to what women in the Bible had already overcome.
I can see that being an awesome study as you're looking at something that you've gone through and
Right.
you can find it in the Word. And then when you
Yes.
find it in the Word, you say, you might ask questions like, okay, now, what was her outcome? How did Jesus talk to her? How did this all come out? Did you find yourself doing that kind of wondering?
I did, and what's so funny is, to me, the Bible, especially the Old Testament, is so interesting. It's almost, not to be blasphemous or anything, but it's almost like a soap opera sometimes in the Old Testament. Some of the things that they went through,
Yes.
Betrayal. There's so many stories in the Bible, and what I wanted to do is make them relatable to the 21st century woman. Characters such as Eve and Esther and the Proverbs 31 woman. I wanted to point out that the same things that they went through, having issues conceiving, fertility issues with respect as women, all those things that we have questions about today in the 21st century, they had those same questions that they were trying to figure out. And those women were no different than we are today. And so I just want to, point people towards God in this book.
That's great. That's a great mission. And yes, in reading it and putting it all down and all that, how were you guided with the chapters? Did you get a little bit at a time, or were you kind of like a little bit in this chapter, a little bit in that chapter? How did that happen?
Well, it started with the outline.
Yes.
And I just sat down in my computer and said, okay, God, what stories do you want me to bring to life in modern times? And so I started with the outline, and honestly, some of the stories that I thought I was going to include, they didn't make the book. And maybe there'll be a transitions part 2. I don't know what God has for the future, but it just started with the outline, and I sat down, and it was almost like I had 2 sides to the paper. I started with what I had been through, the things I had overcome in my life, just in the short period of time being a wife. At that time, I was pregnant. And then, I had just had my baby. And so I started with the things that I was going through at that time and had overcome. And then I sat down and said, now what stories in the Bible are, relatable to the issues that I have? And some of the things are things that during the time when I was going through those trials that I meditated on in the scriptures and what got me through either from my past or my present.
Right. Gotcha. And that's a great and awesome testimony. It's good to be able to take what you've gone through, not be bitter about it, but to look at it and say, I think I'm going to talk about this, and I'm going to relate it to the Bible, and it just might help someone else. And I think it definitely will help someone else. Right. And you are a young lady. Your 30s, you have a lot of life left to you, So I feel like this is great that God has brought you on this journey at this point, but you never know whom you're going to help, what their age is going to be, and whatever. So I'm glad that you were obedient in doing that and forming transitions. And you talked about also some of the great stories or some of the great women in the Bible like Eve and also that Proverbs 31 woman. Have you realized that Proverbs 31 woman, that's an awesome study. They have an entire book. I want to say I can't think of the name of the lady right now, but it's a real thick workbook in it, and she goes through Proverbs 31 line by line.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I'll have to read that.
Yeah. I have to think about it and get that information to you. But that's just awesome. And when you put all of this together, did you have some people to look at it and say, hey, what you think about that? Or what you think about this? I'm sorry.
I did. Actually, the first person was my husband.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I have to, in the book, I definitely dedicated the book to him because he was a catalyst in me actually finishing the book